Oh, kia ora. Today we've
Hi.
got Mr. John Ansell with us. Kia ora, John. How are you?
Hello, Joe. Good, good. Looking forward to it, I think.
Okay, John. So first off, I heard that you wrote a poem about me. Yeah, love to
Oh,
hear
well,
it.
I did. And I wrote it most since I went down to the Martinborough Cemetery where I often go because I don't get any arguments down there, you know? And, uh, oh, shut up. I've got to shut up my phone now. Yes, and I was down there contemplating things, and there were lots of soldiers buried, and many white ones, and some Maori ones. And I thought, well, this is where we end up, isn't it? We can argue all we like, but we end up here. And so I wrote this poem, which I actually performed. I called it Cemetery Symmetry. And then I decided it was for you. And I said so at a poetry reading, which people found a little startling. And then I said so to you, and you thought it was a bloody hoot, and sort of laughed it off. But I wanted to. I will read it. I will read it. It says by Symmetry, poem for Joe Trinder, by John Ansell on Anzac Day, 2021. Right, skinned of their skin and bled of their blood, encased in the ground, encaked with mud. As arm in arm, the white and the brown, they both stood up and they both fell down. They fought for a cause they thought was right. Their clothes are brown and their bones are white. Now side, by day and by night, their clothes are brown and their bones are white. So that was my little poem for you, because I think really it's a short life, and you end up with white bones in brown ground. So that's kind of dual sovereignty, really. No other colours involved, just white and brown.
So your father fought in World War II?
Yes, just like thousands of others.
And what theatre, in the Pacific or Europe?
He asked, he begged if he could be sent to the Middle East with his chums, so they sent him to the Pacific, which is probably wise because he wasn't a very violent man and wouldn't have made a very good killer. He did see some fairly awful things nonetheless, but basically the New Zealanders got sent home and replaced by the Americans who'd been in New Zealand, and they went and died on our behalf when things got really hot because they had better gear. But nonetheless, he signed up just like thousands of others. Still thought he was going to see the world. I mean, his uncle was killed at Gallipoli. But despite that, how many years before? Not many, 1915 to 1940, whatever it was, 25 years. But they went off again, Keggin country, or whatever they did it for. But it was very real fighting in those days. I think we've got World War III happening now that most people aren't even aware of.
Whereabouts is that? Well,
I think it's all around us. All around us. You and I disagree on a number of things, and one of them is is what I call the Vaxecution campaign, which you dismissed cheerily as just the ravings of a nutter. I point to evidence of up to 17 million killed, 3 times as many as Hitler all around the world. And a lot of Maori people I know have been to a lot of tangies recently, but not you, evidently. So anyway, that's just one of the things. But I think we live in I think left and right has been phased out and replaced by honest and dishonest. And
John,
I see
did you ever think that COVID-19 might have been a threat at all?
Not really. A little bit like flu. I had it for 2 days and wiped it out with ivermectin pills, which I wasn't supposed to have because Jacinda had declared them banned because they worked. This
those
pill.
horse people.
Yeah, that's what your side says. They've been into the arms of 4 billion humans in 40 years, and they won a Nobel Prize for curing all sorts of things, the safest drug in the world. And all the left can say is, oh, they're horse dewormers. That's what I mean. I mean, I see dishonesty everywhere. I see we're in an ethical battle, a spiritual ethical battle, and all I try and do is seek out what's real as best I can and say that as plainly or sharply or bluntly. It's funny that sharp and blunt mean the same thing. As I can to get myself in as much trouble as possible, it seems, with family, with friends, with everyone, in the belief that when I have to account for my life, I'll be judged to have called it right and done the right thing. And of course, my opponents think the complete opposite.
Okay, so we'll kick off the question phase.
Yes, we've got questions to answer, haven't we?
So, John, what classifies someone as being part of the Māori elite?
I haven't thought about that, but I suppose someone who is enriched by it, someone who is, I think many people are Maori for the money. They're mainly non-Maori if you look at bloodlines, but then they'll demonise that because that's not convenient. So they'll demonise the person who says that and talks about blood quantum and says you're a bad person for saying that. And it's the most logical thing you can say to identify who somebody is. In reality, not in belief. And so there's people who, as I said to Carwyn Jones is a professor, I think, something like that, at a university. He came up to me at a meeting of the Constitutional Advisory Panel. He always finds himself on the top table there. And he said, "You're John Ansell, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Why did you call me a pretend Maori in your blog?" I said, "I most certainly did not call you a pretend Maori. I called you a make-believe Maori." "Yes," he said. "Oh, why did you do that?" And I said, "Well, because you're Welsh. You've got red hair and a white face, and your best friend told me that your family is riddled with Welshmen. And you've got the same name, incidentally, as the Welsh Welsh First Minister at the time, Carwyn Jones. Very similar name to the great Welsh rugby coach, Carwyn James." He said, "Oh, but I said, but so why should my kids give your kids money?" "Well, my grandmother was forbidden, or great-grandmother was forbidden to speak Maori at school, for one thing. So I didn't grow up speaking Maori." I said, "Well, I had a stepson at the time. He started school unable to speak Chinese. He ended up with the English prize because his mother, and as far as the Chinese goes, his mother taught him that in his spare time. And that's how it was in the 1870s. I think there was a chap called I can't remember the last name right here. There was a petition and many petitions from Maori parents wanting their kids to be taught in English only. They deal with the Maori at home. So I said, that's probably what happened with your grandmother. "Oh, yes, and she was beaten." Well, guess what? There was a lot of beating going on. That's one of the lesser wonderful attributes of the British system, right into the 1970s, I can tell you, and I think 80s. You got caned for doing anything that wasn't the rules. So there's these excuses going around. I don't minimise Maori suffering. I find it reprehensible. I know a guy called Hari, who is called Hud because his teachers couldn't be bothered calling him Hari. They called him Harry. So I don't go for that. I don't go for there's a place down the road from here called Kahutara. I don't say Kahutara. I say Kahutara. I use my own accent. But a lot of the people around here say Kahoutra. So that's where I draw the line. I draw the line at Kahoutra. I think I've wandered off the topic. I do that a lot. What was the topic?
So
The Maori elite.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Well, I think it's just people. I think it's people. We have a uniting principle that I discussed in that meeting with Pem Bird and 15 other Maori people. God knows what I'm doing in a meeting like that. But I was very welcomed. And I said, we are united by this glorious principle. Oh, what's that? Self-interest. And if we're honest, I think we're all motivated by self-interest. It's a self-preservation technique of every single creature under the sun. You can be loving and kind and respectful and giving and generous, but you don't want to be done down. And that's been the case since the invention of men, I think, and to fatal degrees very often.
So, John,
I think Maori people have seen the weakness in the whites. It wasn't always so. In the old days, the British were very much in charge, and as you do in your accent quite often, I see, these men in the pointy hats with their toffee accents, and they wouldn't brook any trouble. But that changed. What changed, I think, was communism, socialism, the Fabian wolf in sheep's clothing, the plot to take over the world, one little step at a time. And that, long story short, made its way into the 1920s and became the oppressors and oppressed critical theory. The new way to get control was to brand certain people oppressors and certain people oppressed. It's now identity politics. And Maori were one of the anointed oppressed, and the communist movement saw this and made common bond, as they do with all groups around the world that have a snitcher on the ruling people. So, yeah, they saw an advantage. And then when the whites went weak and woke in sort of the 60s and 70s, I think the aggressive-minded Maori saw an opportunity to combine emotion and aggression, both two things that the whites were not so fond of, over emotion, and because we are sort of Anglo-Saxon, do everything very, a bit more uptight than Maori people, and the aggression, and that I think explains how Maori have done so well. I'll finish with one thing. When Korowetri was at Jim Bolger's going away party in Te Kuiti, someone I know overheard the conversation between them, and Jim Bolger comes rushing up to Korowetri and says, Korowetri, Kaumatua Korowetri. Jim speaks like that with his teeth clenched. Kaumatua Korowetri, I'm not going to shake your hand. I'm going to give you a big hug. And they chatted for a while, and then Bolger goes off, and Korowetri turns to the guy next to him, a Maori man, and says, "Oh, that's Jim Bolger. We've had him round our little finger for years." And that, in a nutshell, is what's going on, I think. What do you make of that?
So you believe that there's this sinister group called the Māori elite, and they're secretly taking over New Zealand society, and there's an evil, sinister plot against your demographic?
Oh, I think it's what I said before. Self-interest allows the group, broadly Maori with money or political ambitions or whatever you call it, to spy an opportunity. I mean, the King said back in 2016, I think it was, that he wants Maori to have co-ownership, co-governance. I think it was co-governance. It might have been something that means the same thing. Co-sovereignty, equal sovereignty by 2025. And I said then to people like Stephen Franks, who didn't believe me, I said, there you go, there'll be a Maori state. They don't want to stop at co. You see, where is the fairness in 1/6 of a population? And I would say the elite of that population, or the more, the ones more keen on the power in that population, to have even 3/6 of the say of a country. But of course, they don't want to stop at 3/6; they want 6/6. And it's...
But John,
yeah.
do you not think that there is agreements in Te Tiriti o Waitangi that there would be some form of power sharing? Like, for example, Article 2 says that there will be undisturbed estates, forest, and fisheries. Well, we know that wasn't undisturbed. We know that large millions of acres was confiscated by the Crown.
Yeah, and
Don't
if you want to
think
go off that version, see that... I mean, my view is the same as Apirananata's view, and you have to go against, the greatest Maori statesman ever, to advance your position. I agree with him, and but what he didn't know was the existence of the missing final draft in English, which was found in 1989 at the Littlewood place, 1989, I think. And that didn't mention forests and fisheries, so that's an interesting thing. And Claudia Orange was the first to see that, and she said, this could be politically dangerous, which is why she covered up the revelation that was in Busby's handwriting, which all the people knew that the missing draft was in Busby's handwriting.
John, the Littlewood paper, it lacks a critical component to qualify as a treaty, and that it has no signatures.
No,
and from
that's
what I've
Paul
heard,
Moon said. That's what Paul Moon said, and that is staggering that a man of that caliber could say that. It wasn't a treaty; it was the draft into which the treaty was translated. You don't sign drafts. That's not a critical requirement of a draft. A draft is just something you write up, and then you hand over to the person who translates it, which was the Williams. I was going to say the Williams sisters, Williams and his son.
The person who's claimed that it's a draft is Martin Dutre, and Martin's history on New Zealand, well, I'd say that he is an amateur historian, whereas authentic historians have claimed that the Littlewood paper is a back translation intended for the US consulate.
I know, and this is the whole point about experts these days. We're seeing it with the COVID thing. The experts are absolutely reprehensibly incompetent in just about all fields, it would seem. And the same in history. What you've got is a bunch of lefties agreeing on their desired version of things. And that was, I think, Martin Dutre and I went up onto a stage at Auckland Art Gallery because Claudia Orange was doing a talk and confronted her about this. She had got her mate, now deceased, Donald Loveridge, to rip into Martin's book and come up with that back translation theory. It should be possible to have it discussed, that it might very much have been as I said it and as Martin said it. Martin, you wish to dismiss as an amateur historian. It's to me, the amateurs, the ethical, well-researched amateurs are the saviour of the world in many fields at the moment. So we probably won't agree on that, but, I would just make the point that Martin did an absolutely meticulous job, right down to discovering the makes of the brand of paper that was being used for the drafting of that draft in Clendon's house in Okiato, and he did the most meticulous job, and I think Claudia Orange respected that because her comments, which I've got recorded, indicated that she knew that Martin was making a substantial point. So I don't know if we can resolve that here at all.
Yeah,
but that's
John, it's really difficult to respect Martin Dutre's efforts in history because, one, he claimed that the Bush administration was responsible for the 9/11 attacks, that the United States attacked itself as a justification for attacking the Middle East. And then he came up with the bombastic conspiracy theory of a pre-Polynesian civilization, that the Welsh arrived before Polynesia.
Oh boy, Cowan Jones.
Look, The Welsh couldn't even get across the English Channel, let alone circumnavigate into the
I
South
think
Pacific, the entire planet. I mean,
I
bro,
think he was talking about the
seriously?
similarity of structures to Celtic places, possibly more Ireland than Wales. I don't know, but okay, this whole castigation of somebody as a conspiracy theorist is a ploy. I believe it was started by the CIA. It's deployed every day all around the world. Brand you a conspiracy theorist, and you're meant to be a lesser being. Uh, you don't have to agree with somebody on another subject anyway. I think he's right about 9/11. I think all the evidence points to that. I have listened to the evidence on the uh, pre-civilizations. I've seen some of it. Noel Hilliam, I had to send his book back to him. He wanted me to have a first edition. It had the same photos 7 times in some cases. And to me, what purported to be New Zealand could have been anywhere, could have been Fiji or Tasmania on some sort of Greek map. So I don't always align with my side, as it were.
John,
They
remember
don't deserve
when
it.
Noel,
When they do deserve it, I think they do, I think Martin Dutre did deserve it in the case very much of his work on what he foolishly called the Littlewood Treaty. He was just using the other side's term, but it's become attached to his thinking. He doesn't believe it's a treaty. He believes it's a draft for a treaty. He did that job meticulously and deserves respect for that, quite apart from whatever he says about anything else, some of which
John,
I agree and some of which I don't.
do you remember when Noel Hilliam claimed that he discovered a German U-boat in Northland and it was full of gold?
I'll take your word on that. I don't remember, but I know he did see things up there. He did discover things up there. Again, I didn't agree with Noel on that Ends of the Earth book. He didn't write that; somebody else did. Um, I thought it was ludicrous, but I may well have agreed with him on other things. But Noel is not Martin, and each issue has to be taken in isolation. Surely, if we're honest, you take that person's view on that, not that person's view on that or that or that, or someone else who knew him's view on that. That's my point about honesty, really.
Oh,
I'm
thanks for that, John. So, for the record, could I please get you to accuse me of being an elite Māori?
no,
Oh,
no.
John,
I would,
please.
I would if I would if as a favour. But
Yeah.
you're going to nip that out and make that. You're going to do what editors, unscrupulous editors,
Oh,
do.
I would never do that to
I
you,
don't know
John.
your bank account details. I don't know how rich you are. I don't know how many millions. Like Jacinda Ardern is a very, very good saver, for example. She's got 25 million in the bank from having masterminded the execution campaign. She didn't make that from a salary, so she would be an elite. I don't know of your window behind you looks very nice, but you've told me that that's a backdrop. So, so mine, my Dali painting is absolutely authentic fake. Authentic. It's an authentic fake.
So, John, for someone to be part of the Māori elite, can they have an empty bank account, own absolutely no land, not be a rich lister on the NBR rich list? Is it possible to be an elite if you're
Oh well,
none of these?
I don't know really. I mean, Willie Jackson told me that the money doesn't. He said, "Oh, the thing is, because we met at Waitangi by chance, and he very, very, to his credit, invited me on his program where he called me a racist and I called him one, and everything was fair and fair and lovely. But he tried to tell me that the money. Oh, the thing is, John, that the settlement money doesn't get down. And I said, well, Willie, I think not. I think you're right because I see you driving your son to. You live in David Longie's father's old mansion or house, big house, and drive your son to King's College in that SUV I saw you with at Waitangi. I think he could well, and he was a minister till recently, and so I think he probably qualifies as a elite. But I'm in no position to judge you could just be an honest foot soldier for the elite. Honi Harawira, your friend, I mean, he's probably one. I don't know his financial circumstances, but these people get together. You can't just laugh off things like the Maori Council. And I'm just not grasping that. It's not coming into my mind, these other bodies, but the Tainui crowd, the Kingi
So, John, has it ever
Maori
occurred
get
to you?
together.
So,
Sorry.
John, has it ever occurred to you that people who are on the NBR rich list that have hundreds of $1,000,000, billions of dollars, money that they possibly could not spend in their entire lives, could be the elites, and that we are just normal Indigenous people, and they are the real elites, but you are protecting them by claiming that we are the elites, when in fact they are the genuine elites?
Oh no, I'm not saying that there are that the only elites are Maori. I see in the world an alignment of globalists, communists, capitalists. I just call lefties communists because that's what they'd want to be, if they could. But I see very much crony capitalists as part of the elite. I went to see Lloyd Morrison, founder of Infratil, thinking that I might be able to get some money for a campaign to expose the global warming hoax. He said to me, "Oh, we like global warming because we make money out of it." And I thought, oh yeah, how the hell do we go forward now? The communists who get off on power, the capitalists who get off on money, are walking arm in arm, doing all sorts of bad things. And in New Zealand, the tribalists, they're just part of that. They see an opportunity, opportunists. I don't blame them, really. I don't think they've got much in the way of conscience. I think that'd be a good way to, next life, I must ask not to have a conscience because it'd be a lot more fun. But they see an opportunity of weak white people prepared to give them a free country, what we call a free country, or what most people call a free country, they see as a country for free. And who can blame them? If a bunch of idiots are going to give you a country for nothing, based on a series of historical lies, because they're too gutless to stand up to them, then I don't blame the Maori elite particularly. I think they're just responding to incentives. And pride is a big thing. Pride is top of the list of the 7 deadly sins, apparently. I'm not a strong churchgoer or a churchgoer. Pride stops us telling the truth, stops a lot of people being honest about things, and makes them go on defending their own side, whether it deserves to be defended or not. So this is what I mean about the ethical, spiritual battle. I don't think it's going to end well for any of the elites, actually.
So, John, you've taken what we call Indigenous rights and wanting to get redress for land confiscation and colonisation, and you've labelled it as a sinister communist plot and a communist domino effect across Aotearoa.
I would never say that. I would never say that, Joe. I'd never say Aotearoa.
Well, okay, so you've labelled these things as communism. If you've ever actually read Karl Marx's manifesto of communism, is that it's about the state controlling the means of production. So I don't see how an Indigenous people that are halfway around the world, have never read the Communist Manifesto, and somehow are communists that are trying to control the means of production of a nation, when in reality they're trying to get redress for British colonisation of the British Empire, and also they're fighting for what we perceive as Indigenous rights. Do you think that it's fair that you label Indigenous rights as a sinister communist plot?
I think I have to give you half a point at least. I'm having an argument with another chap about my use of the word communist as well. I kind of use it in the bullying sense, in the sense of they're the high watermark for bullying, the communists. I know that the Communist Party made great efforts to align with Maori, I think 1936. But generally what we're seeing now, okay, in China, it's probably the Communist Party running fascism because the Communist Party is still in charge. In New Zealand, we had Jacinda Ardern, who really was the head of World Communist Youth, even though it was called International Socialist Youth, but that's the whole wolf in sheep's clothing strategy anyway, to use lots of words with social in it. So, but if you're quite right. I'm just arguing that you don't have to control the means of production to qualify for that word. Maybe I'm wrong. I certainly know that the socialists don't like it because they know that they would like to do that. The fact that they're not able to do that means that they're not technically communist. So, okay, you can win that one. What was the other bit? I've lost it now.
That Maori were fighting for Indigenous rights.
Oh, yes, Indigenous. Well, Indigenous, yes. Well, Maori were, of course, Indigenous to an island in the Northwest Pacific called Taiwan. Then they became Indigenous to an island in the Southeast Pacific called Rangiati or Hawaiki. Then they thought they'd become Indigenous to these islands in the Southwest Pacific. So multi-indigeneity is the trick. If you can do that, you've got it made. So and they arrived very, very shortly before the whites. That's me minimizing, of course, slightly, hundreds of years before, 400 years before, still by Australian standards, not particularly Indigenous. But they were here. They were the incumbents when the whites arrived, whatever happened to the previous incumbents. So I'm not minimizing that so much. I would ask Maori who want to rewrite history, or whites who want to or white communists, Jacinda, who want to rewrite history, to tell all of the history, not just start the timeline where it suits them. And there's some pretty ugly history that honest Maori will concede was happening before the white men in black frocks even arrived and talked them out of much of it. But let's, if we're going to talk about the history and who's Indigenous, just be honest and tell the whole story.
So, when Polynesians arrived in the year 1250 AD ballpark, this is the best that carbon dating can place the Polynesian rat and their bones to have arrived here, and that's how they've done carbon dating. So they didn't claim to be Maori, these people, when they arrived here. The Maori culture as a people evolved from the people that had lived here. So Maori have never claimed they were Indigenous to other parts of the Pacific because it's a culture and language that's developed here in Aotearoa. Do you not see how they would be Indigenous to this land as opposed because they never called themselves Maori before arriving here? It's kind of like the people that evolved out of Africa and then have finally landed on the British Isles. They didn't call themselves British, but while they were in South Africa, migrating to Great Britain. Yeah. But once they arrived in Britain, then they call themselves the Brits. Do you see how the British are Indigenous to Britain and Māori would be Indigenous to Aotearoa?
Well, I see self-interest, and I see that that's what you'd say if you wanted to pretend to be Indigenous. And Maori have a language which is strikingly similar to language spoken in Hawaii and other parts of the Pacific. So I think they were very closely related. They just gave themselves a new name. In fact, it wasn't the name Maori, of course. But it's just, to me, it's just another way of I don't like talking like this, I actually don't. Saying things like to you, a decent man, I don't like to say that you're pretending, but I think this is why I'm unhappy about the world, is that people are playing make-believe all over the place. And if you don't play make-believe, you're a bad person. This is what we're supposed to believe. Children play make-believe at school and they grow out of it. But on the left of politics in particular, we are expected to play make-believe on, the treaty was a partnership when it wasn't. The vaccine was a real vaccine that's safe and effective. The climate man is causing destruction through overuse of a tiny little few atoms of carbon dioxide and methane. We're meant to pretend all these things by people who are self-interested in concocting these various views, all designed to feed this big, and I do believe it is a conspiracy, not a theory. A lot of bad people getting together to enrich themselves and walk a long way together before they have to fight each other in the final battles. People like, communists and bad capitalists and Islamists. Forces for bad, really, generally speaking. And we're supposed to put up with it and submit to all these excuses. And I won't, you see, and I don't, and I haven't. And so I'm somewhat ostracized for that. And I'm hoping that, people like me will be seen as the good guys in the end when the final history is written, if it's written by an honest person. But even if it is, yeah.
Do you think that us Māori elites ride around in gravy trains?
Yeah, it's the same with all elites. The WEF elite, the World Economic Forum, by this lovable German dictator called Klaus Schwab. He is about as evil as it gets. His father, I think, was the model for Ian Fleming's Bond villain. And so that's one elite that we've got to be extremely worried about at the moment. Subgroups all around the world who can get enriched, and all of our politicians, not the Maori ones, all of them are culpable, presumably being bribed, paid off. I don't know what would make somebody, I don't know what makes doctors take $300 to knowingly kill some of their patients, which if you don't know that, you soon will. I note that the British journalist who criticised Novak or Novak's Djokovic has just dropped dead at the Australian Open, just as Shane Warne did, who also warned us about Djokovic, not taking his vax and all that. Well, Djokovic has just won his latest match, 6-love, 6-love, 6-3. And is the greatest player of all time. And that is the ethical difference, essentially, between the two types of people these days. It comes down to ethical positions on every issue. And I think the good guys are starting to come through. Certainly are in the tennis world.
So, John, from what we've been discussing today, you seem to appear as this kind of anti-woke champion to liberate the people of Aotearoa from the Māori elite, the sinister Charles Schwab, and you're going to save us from the vaccine apocalypse and a sinister communist takeover. Would you say that's what you're here to save us?
I listened to the various weapons deployed. You're using mockery there. Now that's quite a good one. That works on a lot of people, and all sorts of other insults. I'm just having a war with Brian Edwards at the moment. Brian Edwards is the former elite interviewer on television in the days we only had one channel, and founder of Fair Go. And Fair Go championed the rights of the little people against the evil corporates. But today, or the last couple of days, he's been championing the rights of Golriz Garaman, presumably his friend, to steal from those people. And I'm trying to point out the hypocrisy. But he doesn't understand, because he's a lefty. He doesn't understand morals. I say you guys are suffering, some say mental illness, I would say a moral illness, to not recognise the hypocrisy in that stance. it just makes the case, really. And he wants to deploy all sorts of emotional tricks to brand me a bad person and those like me. When she's someone who calls people like me Nazis just because we've got white skin and stand up to her ridiculous nonsense. I don't think I'll be saving anyone, Joe. I just use my words. I only have one ability in the world, I think, and that's, a tendency to put words together reasonably well. See, Brian Edwards interviewed me. This is relevant. In 2005. She said, this is about the billboard campaign I did for the Brashnail Party in 2005. And he said, we have in the studio today John Ansell. Now, you may not know the name John Ansell, but he did those marvelous billboards for the national. Now, he would have said that through gritted teeth because he's a friend of Helen Clark's, you see. And these billboards had Helen Clark on one side in red and blue on the other with Don Brash. And I'd been practicing for this because I knew what he was going to say next. And he said, now let's take, wonderful billboards, John. Oh, thank you very much, Brian. I know how sincere you are being. Let's take one at random. I thought, here we go. Iwi Kiwi. What does that mean? I'll tell you what it means, he says, before I've had a chance to speak. Iwi is Maori tribe, yeah, and Kiwi is all other New Zealanders. And I find that absolutely... Brian, dictionary. I think you'll find that Kiwi, in the colloquial sense, is all New Zealanders, including iwi. That's the sort of clever bit, if I may boast. And I said, furthermore, Brian, an essay, a billboard is not an essay writing contest. Your market is hurtling towards the medium at 100K or 180 in some cases, Brian, meaning Helen Clark chundering through the countryside on the way to a rugby test at 180 kilometres an hour. So, they try that stuff on. Kiwi does not mean white people, but it was interpreted that way by everybody from Nandorth Tanshos down, completely lying, to brand the National Party, the Brashnail Party, and its evil billboard maker as racist. What all it was trying to say was that one party is standing up for 1/6 of the population, and the other one stands up for 6/6.
John, can I just interject here?
Yeah.
That billboard that you created, the Iwi Kiwi billboard, me personally, in 2005, I was highly offended by it.
I know.
Before that moment, I was apolitical. Politics did not interest me in the slightest. But that there got my heckles up because how I felt about it is it othered me. It made me feel that because I'm a member of an iwi, I am no longer a Kiwi. I'm not part of this collective national identity. I'm the other. You
willfully misrepresented it. You willfully misrepresented it in your self-interest. If you had actually thought about it, you would have recognised that what it was saying was that the National Party is inclusive and the Labour Party was... I know, before you mention it, I think John Key turned it round the other way, but I think Helen Clark stuck up for the Kiwis better than he later did. But, yeah, you know that highly emotional, less logical people are going to interpret it how they want to. But that doesn't make it wrong. That doesn't make it inaccurate. It was an accurate statement. Don Brash, who I know... See, what's not known about Don Brash is that he refused to join the Australian Labour Party when he was over there doing his... at Canberra, Australian National University. His mates wanted him to join the Australian Labour Party. He was a socialist. He was a Fabian socialist in his youth. And he didn't want to because the Australian Labour Party, like presumably the Australian Liberal Party, or whatever they were called then, believed in the White Australia policy. And Don was not going to be part of any party that believed in the White Australia policy. And you're wrenching your face. You can't believe it. But Don is not a racist person. He's a fair-minded person. Did he eventually join it? I'm not sure. But, yes, his mate said, look, I don't like it either, but we'll get in and we'll change it. No, I'm not joining any party. So I started to talk like people, I'm not joining any party that's going to be a part of the of any racist White Australia policy. So That's something that he probably should have promoted, but that would have been too self-promotional.
What went wrong, John?
Okay.
What
Well,
went
nothing
with?
went wrong. Dishonest people failed to see that he was never racist. And, he was never racist. You can't explain why he was racist, because he wasn't advocating, he was just advocating a single standard of citizenship. And he believes in fairly settling, or settling fairly any grievance that has merit. I'm pretty sure he said that in his supposedly incendiary 2004 speech, Orewa speech. I know him to believe that. He doesn't want unfair treatment, but so much of it was played up. Ngāi Tahu got mega millions. There were only about 2,000 people in the South Island who were Maori in Ngāi Tahu in 1840, and they'd migrated down from Poverty Bay. And Poverty Bay Ngāi Tahu were indigenous to Poverty Bay. Then they became indigenous to Evans Bay in Wellington, just across the harbour from Shelley Bay, which is another story. Then they became indigenous by wiping out many of the Ngāti Mamoe and Waitaha, I think. In the South Island, they became indigenous to the South Island. Then they hold their hands up for countless millions for settlement. Then there were some dodgy dealings, I think, in the 1870s against them. So that's what was being settled, but they did pretty well considering there were only 2,000 at the time. And Willie Jackson will say that the value of the South Island is 66 billion. That's another con argument that's used. They will use the improved value, improved by who, mainly, not the value at the time. So it's just that we can argue all day, all out of self-interest. So I'm fighting my corner. I will fight for the people who look a bit like me, my ancestors, when they deserve it, not when they don't. You do the same. Where does that get us? I don't know.
Moving along, John.
Yeah.
So you were once the adman for the X Party, and inadvertently, evidently, you were fired from the X Party for being too racist. Like, how do you do that?
Well, you don't. I wasn't. But I'll tell you what happened there. Because you've got the essence, apart from the being fired part. Because I had to stand up with Stoush, with David Seymour, who is now the great champion of equal citizenship. I asked him at a meeting in Carterton before the 2020 election about the undemocratic changing of the name to Aotearoa. He said, I don't care what we're called. I couldn't care if we're called Timbuktu, as long as they employ our policies or something. And then he congratulated me on the Iwi Kiwi billboard, but said that one you did in 2011, that didn't work. I said, well, it didn't work, David, because it didn't run. It didn't run because of people like you undermining it. And you have the gall to say that. And that ad was very provocative. It was meant to be. I was trying to get a party to 5%. They were
Is that the one where you said that colonisation took Māori from the Stone Age to the Space Age?
Oh, that was... See, I did an ad which was... it would have been incendiary, but it would have got people talking and they would have had to take a position. It said, fed up with the Maorification of everything, which was nothing other than a fact. And it's taken off a hell of a lot since 2011. It's now called co-governance. They like to hide behind euphemisms, but that's what it was, the Maorification of everything. And that was too hot for Don Brash's deputy, John Boscawen. I had said to Don Brash I would work on his campaign if he ran the ads that I did. He didn't. And so I wanted to get out of my contract. No, I want you there at the celebration. I said, there won't be a celebration, Don. You have one chance in this party. You have to carry on that position you took in the National Party. Stand up for 6/6 of New Zealanders. against the elites of the 1/6. No. So I thought, righto, I'll have to get myself out of this because I don't want to hang around any further if they're not going to listen to me. And a journalist rang up, and I don't remember why he rang, but I said the words, look, Maori have gone from the Stone Age to the Space Age in 150 years and haven't said thanks. I mean, it's all, they just want to moan all the time, the elites, about how bad colonisation's been for them when it could hardly have enriched them more. So that made its way into the paper, and I think the top 10 lists of the quotations of the year or something. At that point, Don Brash released me from my chains. Two things about that. One of them was that if he'd had any smarts, he would have said, well, John had no right to speak on behalf of the party. He's right, of course, but there's no right. In other words, that he's right, of course, being the operative bit. But he didn't. He just said the rest. And to his discredit, he styled my departure as a sacking in his book. That was a lie. It wasn't a sacking. It was self-removal that he complied with.
John.
Anyway, it's the same effect. But yeah.
John, isn't like getting fired from the ACT Party for being too racist, like getting fired by the KKK for lynching too many people?
Oh, that brings me on to the subject of Chris Finlayson. He described, first of all, as I just told you, I wasn't fired. But nonetheless, KKK is what Chris Finlayson called me. We were quite chummy at the National Party. I said, why do you want to get into politics after that, glittering legal career? Oh, I just want to get in and sort out the treaty and then get out again. And I thought that was a good thing because I thought what he meant by sorting out the treaty was, taking us to equal citizenship. But it wasn't what he meant. I saw him recently in Featherston at a Booktown event that they have there, talking about his new book, which has the word Aotearoa up big in it. And so I popped to my feet at question time and I said, oh, John Ansell, the one that you called New Zealand's version of the KKK. And then we had a discussion about, and he just lied. He said that, the name of the country is New Zealand. I said, well, why did you call it Aotearoa in your book? So they can't answer these things. It's not going to end well for dishonest people. It was the same at Orewa. I couldn't resist when I was staying at Orewa, going along to a National Party thing that Finlayson was at. And he was congratulating himself on how much more money he'd given away than Cullen, how many more settlements he'd made. And I had my hand in the air the whole time, which was a source of most great amusement because I knew he wasn't going to. He pretended to welcome me, and then he ignored me for the rest of the time. So I just kept my hand in the air as we went around all the other people pretending not to see me. And eventually there was so much laughter he had to take my question. Oh, John, yes, John. I said, yes, have you given any thought to whether any of those, I said, first rate surrendering, Chris, magnificent effort. Have you ever given any thought to whether those settlements were justified? He said, oh, what do you mean? What do you mean? I said, well, the payment of, I forget how many millions it was now, to, I think, Rongafakata for injuring the feelings of Te Koti, who's responsible for the tossing in the air of the Lavin children and impaling them on bayonets, that sort of thing. And I said, well, what about Ngāti Toa, where you compensated them for the loss of their maritime empire? That would be Cook Strait, the means by which they went down and committed heinous atrocities upon the Ngāi Tahu, albeit with the assistance of a British captain, I think.
So moving along, John.
He didn't he didn't argue. He couldn't argue. Moving along.
Yeah, moving along. So you've complained about the Māorification of Aotearoa. Now, on the 6th of February 1840, 100,000 people were Māori, and then there was probably around about maybe 2,000 to 3,000 British tourists in the country.
Tourists.
The Māori language is the
Tourists who've been living for 20 or 30 years.
The predominant language. Let me finish. The Māori language is the predominant language in the country. It's spoken by 99% of the population. And so what's happened for there to be the Māorification if Māori is now started to be used in this land in mainstream everywhere? Like, what happened for there to be the de-Māorification of Aotearoa?
Well, if you keep saying Aotearoa, that was an undemocratic assumption by various prime ministers, one in particular, that we have decided to change the name of our country. You see, that's the sort of thing that gets the goat of people like me. It's not that we don't want to be fair. It's just that we can't stand the rampant unfairness of these things, which are never dealt with. They're always resulting in, you're always put down for mentioning it. But English has become the language of the world, like it or not, as those Maori people recognised, and as the Maori chiefs, like Tamati Wakanani, recognised. They were being offered a good deal by that treaty. They were offering a way out of perpetual cannibalism and infanticide and all these other things that were going on, which is just guys being guys, as happened down through history. But there was a better way to do things. They signed up to it. For better or worse, it was a lot better than it was worse. And there are a flourishing Maori population now, as a result. There was a loss, and that was the actual communist John Robinson, who was thought to be a safe bet with the Treaty of Waitangi Research Unit at Victoria University to write about the cause of Maori depopulation. He concluded that it was caused not by the colonisation but by the loss of breeding stock because of the loss of men from the wars that had massively depopulated the Maori. So that's just one of the deceits that we have to put up with all the time. All these lies we have to put up with.
Are we able to get back to that question? So yeah. 1840.
Yeah.
I'll rephrase the question because you seem to get offended by the word Aotearoa. So in 1840, the word, like, in 1840, right?
Nutirani was the word used, wasn't it? Nutirani.
Let me finish the question. In 1840, 99% of the population are Māori. The Māori, Te Reo Māori, is the predominant language in this land.
Yep.
There's a foreign language called English, and here in what you would like to call the Dominion of British New Zealand, there's been, you claim there has been a Māorification since 1840. How can that be when the Māori language culture is 99% of everything in this land?
Well, we've got to be careful to make sure you attribute my comments to things that have come from me. The Māorification is something that's happened in recent decades. It's that opportunity that was spotted. And it was done without consultation. We are expected to believe that a language spoken by a small minority of a minority, and I think, see, another relevant case is where I campaigned against the previous mayor of Wellington, Justin Lester. He had decided to demote the language spoken by 100% of New Zealanders below the language spoken by perhaps 2 or 3% of New Zealanders in libraries in Wellington. He had decided that Wellington was henceforth to be the Te Reo capital and Te Reo just means the language. I found that offensive because the language, if any language has earned the right to be called the language, that's English language, spoken by 100%. And so he decided that unilaterally decided that. So I unilaterally decided to demote him and succeeded.
So look, John, like going back,
Yeah.
1840, Te Reo Māori is 99% used by the people of this
Yeah.
land. And
Yeah.
then there's a minor foreign language called English.
A
Now,
major foreign language.
how can a language that was spoken by about 3,000 tourists be
Well, you
then
look how you minimise everything. 3,000 tourists. These are people that had lived there for decades, some of them. And the chiefs at the time had signed up to this colony, whether you like it or not. Api Rananatu is an honest Maori who made that clear. If you've got a problem, ask your ancestors. But they facilitated that. They saw benefit. They liked the whites coming in, living amongst them. They could trade with them with their new fancy gear like nails and all that. They knew what was coming, and they said thank you at Kohimarama. That's a very inconvenient conference. It happened with a record turnout of chiefs from Ngāpuhi to Ngāi 20 of them Ngāpuhi, when Ngāpuhi tried to say that they didn't cede sovereignty, thanking the governor for British sovereignty. The word Queen came up 477 times. So, in other words, that was ratified. The decisions taken in 1840 were ratified in 1860. And it became an English colony, a colony of the British Empire, which Maori were generally, according to the rapturous speeches at that 1860 conference, happy with. They had some problems, and they weren't shy about talking about those problems either. Maori are not shy when it comes to pointing out inequities. But overall, they were pleased with the colonisation project. It's only their latter-day descendants that spied an opportunity with the weak whites, disproportionately female, like the ones who've wrecked the education system, because they are more comfortable surrendering the country their forefathers built for the sake of a quiet life and a bit of virtue signalling. That's the Maorification you should be talking about, how fair it is to, in today's world, not the 1840 world, in today's world, where the whole world wants to learn English for reasons to do with that empire, but more to do with America, for convenience. For convenience, John, they want to be speaking English.
We're playing whack-a-mole here. Look,
yeah.
Okay, 1840, let me rephrase this question. We don't sidetrack. 1840, Aotearoa is...
Which hadn't been used then. Until 1990, hasn't been used in 1840. You've got to get every bit right to get away with this stuff. There was no Aotearoa in 1840. Okay, but anyway, New Terrain, whatever it was called.
Okay. In the year 1840, right, in this land, Te Reo Māori and Māori culture is 99% of the language. And there is a foreign language that's spoken by about 1% of the population. Now, how can you have, by a bunch of British tourists, how can you have...
They were about to go home, were they?
Well, they did. George Grey went home. Okay, so I'll reframe the question. In the year in the year 1840, and I won't use the word Aotearoa because it highly offends you. In the year 1840, in the British Dominion of New Zealand, the Te Reo Māori is the 99% spoken language, and there's about 1% of British tourists who speak the foreign language called English. And you're claiming that there has been a sinister Māorification happen since 1840. How do you explain that?
I don't know how many times I have to say it. I didn't claim any such thing at all. I said it's been happening in recent times when we're expected to believe that a language and a culture are practiced now with the consent of the people of 1840 to become a colony of the British Empire, which we no longer are, but were then. So they must have seen that coming, mustn't they? There was an Anglification back then, I suppose you could say. That Anglification by consent, by mutual consent. But now it's the other way. When the Maori population, which has surged since that time from, I think, 70,000, according to the communist John Robinson, the numbers were about 70,000 and 2,000 or something like that. But now it's hundreds of thousands. I can't quite remember the final number. Growing by the day, in part Maoriness. It's just this. Well, I've said it several times. It's this opportunism to let's magnify things. Let's magnify the Maori part, the Maori 1/6 of the country. I don't think it's fair that 1/6 should control the other 5/6, as is happening increasingly. Is supposed to be turned back by this latest Three Amigos government. I doubt very much whether they will. The government website is still under the name of Te Kawanatanga o Aotearoa. Now, how do you argue, Joe Trinder, that that's fair? That that the language spoken by 3%, if it's 3, representing 16 or 17%, should be dominant on the government website without any consultation with the people at all? How do you argue that that's fair?
Okay, so I can speak from experience about this.
Yeah.
My mother, whenever she went to her Catholic school, if she accidentally spoke Te Reo Māori, she was beaten severely for speaking her native language, and she had no European descent. She was 100% Māori descent. Now, you've claimed that there was an Anglofication by consent in this country. I don't believe that in the slightest. From what the history that I've read is that there was domestic violence used by the Ministry of Education to beat this language out of.
Do you deny the petition? The petitions?
Children. Oh, I'm sure there was by colonisation apologists that were in the National Party. I'm sure there was.
No, I'm talking about the petition by 377 Maori. That's the one I'm familiar with in 1877, I think, demanding that their children be taught in English. You know that.
Yeah, but that's not the general consensus of Māori. They didn't want to. There was no.
How do you know that?
So what we do know is there's never been a request. Look, John, we know that there has never been a request by any Māori in the history of the world, Māori parent, to beat my child if they accidentally speak Te Reo Māori. This was a racist agenda set up by colonists to assimilate. Can you accept that there was a form of assimilation happening against...
Well, I don't know the numbers. You say it's obviously that 377 petition and other ones that I can't remember the numbers of, by Maori parents quite understandably demanding that their children be taught the language of the world into which they could then move and make a living. So I can understand why those forward-thinking Maori, see, there were forward-thinking Maori and backward-thinking Maori, there still are. The Tamati Wakanenis and those sort of people were the forward-thinking ones. And those parents were the forward-thinking ones. They accepted the reality. As to the beating, I think it was pretty horrendous, the whole school system that required capital punishment, which extended into my day, and it wasn't just for speaking Maori, it was for doing anything against the rules. And that was against the rules. Now, I don't apologise for that. I don't minimise that. But that was then, and this is now. Things have changed an awful lot in the world since even a few decades ago in respect of racism. And I think it's been a very good rebalancing of the racism of the races of the general concept of humanity, of what constitutes the way we treat people. I'm just saying that pendulums go left and right, and this one is now going back again, and we are now expected to play second fiddle to Maori culture. We are expected to believe that our government is called the Te Kawanatanga o Aotearoa. You have deftly dodged my question because I think you know you can't answer it. Why? How is it fair that the New Zealand government website is headed Te Kawanatanga o Aotearoa, as were the census forms? That's why I've got 8 of them stacked up out the back that I will not respond to.
Okay, John, I can answer this for you.
Okay.
If you were to look at a globe of the planet Earth, and then you were to look down in the Southwest Pacific in an area called Polynesia, which you live on. You live on some Polynesian islands.
I live on New Zealand.
So you live on some Polynesian islands. This is part of Polynesia. When Captain James Cook arrived, this was part of Polynesia, and there were Polynesian people living on this land. So
who's living here now?
So why do you think that it's mandatory for us to avoid having a Polynesian language in the middle of Polynesia? Like, you don't live in Europe, John.
Well, there's more fish. Why don't we speak the language of fish? There's more fish in the South Pacific than there are people. Why don't we go glug 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 all the time? That's not bad, actually. Write that down.
So have you noticed you live in Polynesia?
I've noticed I've noticed, like it or not, I live in a country made up of New Zealanders who, terribly sorry to have to inform you, at the last census, I think we're sort of 70% a bit my shade, which doesn't mean that I cleave towards the white way of doing things in all cases. But you call it Polynesia, I call it a bloody great ocean with lots of dotty little islands all over the place. And Auckland is the biggest Polynesian city in the world, apparently, but most of the people there are not Polynesian. So, I'm asking you how it is fair that a language spoken by 3%, but you might stretch that to 16 or 17% in the people that it, or the part people that it represents, how that is fair that is the dominant language on the government website under a national New Zealand First Act government, of all things. How is that fair?
Okay, you're adopting what's called colonial amnesia. Remember,
white supremacy.
Colonists deliberately attempted to suppress Te Reo Māori. They beat it out of children. This is why it's only by 3%. And in the entire history of Māori history, never once has a Māori parent said to the Ministry of Education, "Hey, look, I want you to use domestic violence against my child."
That's what those 377 petitioners were doing.
Māori ever again.
That's what those petitioners were in effect doing, because they knew the rules. The petitioners who did that, they knew the rules. They knew that their kids, they were demanding it. If you read what they wrote, it's not just, it's quite a fierce demand that they do it. And so they knew what the rules were in those days.
You're telling me hundreds of Māori parents wrote messages saying, "Look, I want you to use domestic violence against my child and beat the Māori language out of them."
They didn't call it that, but they came from a culture that thought nothing of the cruelest activities. This idea of the British being the worst, the biggest brutes in New Zealand history, I mean, it's just so laughable if you've read the Musket Wars or any of that stuff. So those Māori, it was a different world. There was capital punishment. There was corporal punishment everywhere for any that's how they thought that they imprinted information on children.
John, it seems like you're trying to trivialize domestic violence against children, and you're trying to tell me.
I'm opposed to it. I'm opposed to it.
You're trying to tell me there's an alternative history where Māori parents were actually asking the Ministry of Education to beat a language out of their own children.
Well, I'm saying they signed a petition demanding that those children be taught in English. They knew the English school system involved corporal punishment. They didn't want their children, as far as I'm aware, that was to ask them not to have native schools. I might be wrong about that. They had native schools where presumably they spoke to the children in Maori. The parents who signed that, the 377 who signed the I can't remember the other name, but petition, they wanted their kids taught in open schools, in cross-cultural, bicultural schools, I guess, and wanted their children raised in the English language so that they could prosper in the, I suppose, the empire, where they saw that those children could operate as adults instead of confining themselves to Maori culture. So they knew that they were going to get beaten if they broke the rules, yeah. And they were going to take care of teaching them Maori at home. That was the idea, I think. So, but you're trying to paint me as a bad person for not condemning. I do condemn corporal punishment, particularly when I was at school. I would condemn that. But it was the reality of the time. And if we want to argue about the violent realities of the respective cultures in New Zealand, then it's not going to end well for Maori once their violence is laid out for all to read about.
Can you admit that British colonists who controlled society during the early 20th century actively went out on a campaign to suppress the Māori language, not to teach, not as this generous attempt to teach young Māori how to speak English, but they actually actively went out to suppress it through violence and discipline?
I don't know. If they did, it was bad. I don't know. I don't know if they did it with that in mind. Things were pretty martial in those days, right up to the 70s, as I recall, in certain schools. But I think there was a degree of patronisation that's fairly evident from the difference between the two cultures. I mean, when the British arrived in their pointy hats and pointy ships, must have been like a spaceship landing in my town square, and the incumbents have to have a little meeting, don't they? Have to say, what are we going to do? And some will say, let's kill them. And then some others might say, actually, that might not work out so well because they've got tractor beams and they could just snuff us out in an instant. And by the way, I've been to Mars and they're not bad. It's some good stuff we can have. Why don't we and they seem to want to help us, so why don't we do that? Oh, no. And so you can see what led to the 1840 discussions on the front lawn at Waitangi. Some were pro, some were anti, and the pro-colonials won. The Tamati Wakanenis talked the others around, and they all signed. Many signed, and a large number eventually signed. So going back to the past, I don't think you can even win that one, but you certainly can't win the present. The present is that there's a lot of people are quite miffed about this idea that we have to be bullied by a small percentage of the population who use emotional blackmail and always the threat of aggression, violence, and we are supposed to pay homage to that culture, which many of us don't share a love for. Many of us went along with it at primary school. We had stick games and poi, and we didn't think anything of it. It seemed rather nice, and learnt to count to 10 and all this stuff in Te Reo Māori. We weren't thinking of it as some sort of takeover then, because it wasn't. It just seemed like a part of being a Kiwi, a New Zealander. We had Māori in our rugby teams and classes, and we didn't really think of each other as different. But that's been played up quite deliberately by that C word, or whatever you want to call the left.
Communism?
Yes, or the left, or whatever, as a way to destroy the nation state. That's what the left is about, destroying a nation state and making the world fit for a glorious united nation, a united communist, globalist, technocratic, whatever you call it, nation. That's what's going on now in all sorts of ways. We're about to sign up, it seems, in May to a World Health Organization, which sounds like it'll be the world government when you look at the draconian powers that they're going to be awarded if we don't pull out. So the test of this government is whether they actually will pull out of the World Health Organization. But this is what's going on under our noses. There's plans being made for ID cards without which and digital currency without which you won't be able to eat. You won't be able to buy things. If the government doesn't like you, you will effectively be killed because you won't be able to buy food. That's how serious things are at the moment, that you find so hilarious, because you don't believe it, because you don't want to look at it, or maybe you do. I don't know whether you don't know it or whether you do know it, but are just deploying one of these tricks, the smiling and the mockery. But that's what's going on for those of us who are observant. The Maori situation is a small thing by comparison.
Do you think that this apocalypse is being led by the lizard Illuminati?
No, I don't know if they're lizards. They could be cockroaches. I've seen some very suspicious cockroaches crawling around here. So I'm not sure. I think we're going to eat those, though. I think the plan is we eat the cockroaches and the lizards get off. But, well, maybe the lizards eat us. I'm supposed to be a lizard, according to somebody. Who was he? I'm a lizard. Yeah, I must be a... Anyway, I'm not a crocodile like Winston Peters. He's a lying crocodile lying in the swamp.
Okay, moving along.
All things are possible. Yes, we might be lizards, we might be cockroaches. I think we just have to follow the evidence. That's all I try and do, is try and see what's happening. Know that the other side is going to use various tricks to mock and distract and divert and continue the make-believe. If we don't play make-believe, we are bad people and we will be dealt with accordingly, just like in class. So we've come back to the classroom again. It's make-believe. It's the Emperor's New Clothes. Or maybe
so, John, remember many years ago, a multi-millionaire called Lewis Crimp gave you $50,000 to go on a tour of Aotearoa to express your views on the Māori nation.
He's a guy from Invercargill. I don't know if it was that much. I don't think it was that much. Might have been. I don't think so. But I met him down there. He seemed like he could stand up. He was a guy that would stand up in a pub, and I forget now what he said. It was just a statement of truth anyway. He wasn't a well-loved man, but he got a lot done down in Invercargill. He wasn't a racist, as far as I could tell. He was just he was just... See, what am I? What are people like me? We're oddballs. We're different. We are, as I say, unusual, which is unusual spelt wrong. See, that's a joke. Pronounced wrong. And that's the same of the people in the so-called freedom movement, which should be called the anti-vax murder movement.
So if you receive...
We're different. We call things what they are. We like to... I think it's excessive honesty. I think it's unusual amounts of honesty, and you pay a price for. You pay a huge price for that.
John, if you receive $50,000 from Lewis Crimp for going on a tour and talking about your views on the Māori nation, doesn't that mean you're on the anti-treaty gravy train?
Well, you could say that, couldn't you? I was certainly fundraising. I had in mind all sorts of things. I'm not very good at that kind of thing, at raising money and at leading things. I tend to be a bit of a one-man band. But, yeah, I did raise some money to do that tour. Julian Batchelor is much better at it than me. He is much better funded and just as truthful and much better organised, much more energy.
What's your thoughts on Julian Batchelor?
I think he is heroic in terms of taking that movement on, taking the Maori thuggery on, as he does every day. He was motivated by some personal thing regarding a property development. Lots of people have been motivated by, have had things like that to happen to them. I think he goes... See, he does it like a schoolmaster. I was on the door for him in Kapiti, which was the same venue as I had my meeting about 10 years before on the same subject. But his approach is that of a schoolmaster. My approach is more conciliatory. I had a meeting in Tauranga. I was rung by a policeman. I don't like policemen now because of the thuggery that I saw them do at Parliament, and I've written a song called Mr. Constabully about that. But the policeman rang me. He said, I'm the head of your security detail for your Tauranga meeting. I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, well, 150 Maori are threatening to protest against you. I said, oh, really? Oh, well, you realise I'll be going to talk to them, won't you? Oh, I wouldn't recommend that, Mr. Ansell. I said, no, well, I mean, I don't have anything against them. I have an issue of political fact that I'm campaigning on, and oh no, I don't. Anyway, when I got there were about 20 singing Kumbaya, more or less, and I had a chat to them. The leader was a man called Cameron, and that is the surname of the British general that Tauranga Maori are not supposed to like. So that was interesting. I invited them into the meeting. That didn't go down entirely well with the people who were in the meeting, 200 of them. But they sat at the back and generally behaved respectfully as I stated my case. This is called Treatygate. And I invited a couple of them up the front. That worked okay, except one of them took a picture of the meeting attendance from the front, which didn't go down well with them, and consequently I wore the backlash of that. But generally speaking, we parted on friendly terms. I got to state my case, they listened, and they got to say a few words at the end, and that's how I'd rather do things. And on the other hand, things have got a lot more contentious since those days. And the people who turned up at his live-in meeting, I went to that. That didn't last very long. There was a lot of violence. And at the Kapiti meeting, he was more organised. He had roadblocks further down the road. There was some violence. I was actually invited by these lovely Christian young people who were handing out leaflets. They were protesting. They were trying to get the Maori flag into the meeting. Well, I was on the door and I just pulled that off them. They weren't going to get away with that. And I also had to nudge some other guy towards the door because he decided to start up a big boombox to annoy everybody during the meeting. But what I was saying about the young Christians, they invited me to lunch at their little commune, a little Christian commune out of Waikanae, where I used to live once. So it was good to go back there, not to the commune. I didn't live at the commune. They heard me. They heard me. They let me speak. They weren't they were discombobulated by the things I said, which are the sort of things I'm saying today. They didn't take it out on me. They invited me back again if I wanted to go and stay. But they were upset. They were normal, young, white, brainwashed lefties. They were quite respectful to me. I was respectful to them. They were definitely offended by the sort of things I was talking about, as you are. But we managed to have that discussion reasonably happily, like we seem to be. We'll probably go away to our respective corners unmoved. But, yeah, I'd rather do things like that personally. Julian may have a result. I don't know.
John,
stating the truth as well.
One of the things that I respect you over is that you don't have a fake profile. So a lot of the anti-treatist people hide behind anonymous profiles. You actually offer your real identity, and you stand by.
How do you know? No, I do.
Okay, so you do have some fake profiles, and you're someone like Brad or something. But at least you have the courage to stand by your name, whereas 90% of the anti-treatists hide behind fake profiles. Also, Julian Batchelor is not prepared to do any interviews with the opposing sides. He's not prepared to go into any form of debate, whereas you will sit down and you will talk with your critics. And I think that takes a hell of a lot of courage to actually talk with your critics, even though I ideologically disagree with basically everything that you have to say, except when it comes to maybe the world wars and remembrance and.
That's right. You're a war guy. You're a military guy, aren't you? I saw you in a post about that. Yeah, you're interested in that stuff.
Yeah. So, as you know, I'm ex-Navy. My dad was in the Navy. My grandfather was in the Navy, and my koro on my Māori side was in the 28th Battalion in North Africa and Italy. And so, with this issue, I agree with you that we need to honour the people that went and fought in World War II. When it comes to issues like vaccines, I'm a pro-vaxxer. I love getting vaccinated. It's my favourite thing to do.
Great.
And
enjoy life. Enjoy life now.
And on the Treaty of Waitangi, we absolutely oppose each other ideologically. I believe that the Treaty of Waitangi is about Indigenous rights. You entirely disagree with that. And when it comes to things like communism, you think that there's a sinister communist takeover, and I just laugh. I think it's hilarious.
Well,
yeah.
I also it's a shame I'm responding to that lovely statement, but I also admire what you do. You don't mince words about me, but here we are. And it was the same with Willie Jackson. He was good enough to interview me on his show. It started off 20 minutes. It ended up having to be extended to 60 minutes because there was quite a lot of interest. John Tamahiri was very upset with him for doing that because by giving me a forum. But Willie, at core, I think, believed in the fairness of that. I don't say that he's fair in all respects, but I gave him credit for that. And I give you credit for this. And I think if I could do one thing for the world, it would be to have an online debating tool, which I might call the House of Common Sense, like the House of Commons, but it might be called anything. I even thought you might call it Squabble, spelt wrong, SQABL. But it's where we go to settle our differences. It's where we teach kids from school that you resolve things with light and not heat, and you put down if you believe in something, you put that across the top line, then you put your 5 or 10 points, and then another person who believes the opposite. I believe the flat earth is flat, right? Instead of mocking that person, we say, okay, you write that down on the top, you put down your 5 or 10 reasons why the earth is flat. Somebody else who thinks it's a different shape, anyone, maybe a boomerang shape, or some people think it's globular. Can you believe that? Put down the counter reasons, and then the first person can come back into the third column if necessary, and column for column. That might be one way to settle as best we can what the facts of an issue are. That doesn't settle the emotion, but it's something. And then you could see for the first time the architecture of that particular debate. You could see what each side thought. I changed my mind on end-of-life choice or one of those things because a friend of mine made me aware that when this comes in, it's the thin end of the wedge and you have to do all sorts of other bad things or something like that. But, this is where you get to see what both sides are saying. Each side might, if they're honest, see some merit in some, if not all, of what the other side's saying, and vice versa. This is how we might be able to progress without rancor, by having that system in place where this is how grown-ups settle their arguments, up to and including countries, starting with kids in a playground, up to and including countries. Or at least you'll have a better chance of seeing what the two sides are, in the hope that we might be able to sort of ethically come together, or humanitarianly humanely come together and realise that we don't actually have. There's a lot more that we have in common than that which separates us, and we're mainly arguing about the fringe stuff in the cause of pride. Anyway, sorry, a bit of a rave there.
No, thanks for that, John.
Thanks for letting me rave.
Come to the end of my questions. Is there anything you wanted to ask me?
I had a little list here, and I'm just going through all the things that I wanted to get out, and I think I've got most of them. In fact, yeah, all of them. I'm largely satisfied, I think. I think we've agreed on what we can agree on and not agreed on what we don't agree on, but we don't seem to want to kill each other. We don't, as I said to you in that other meeting, that we just don't hate well enough. We've got to work on that. Maybe we need to get advice from the Israelis and the Arabs or something. It's just very upsetting how the world is so combative. To an extent, I think it's set up by the people higher up who have every reason to profit from the squabbling, profit including banksters, and I think there are baddies as well as goodies in the world, and baddies tell fibs and baddies lie and cheat and steal and kill, and a lot of people don't seem prepared to accept that that is possible when there's evidence of it all the time, because we prefer to be in our bubbles of happiness. In my little party town, I'll go up to town and everyone will be drinking and happy. I get accused of being an angry person when I'm not, but I am to an extent on that score, on the score of what's actually happening, and being minimised by people with the incentive to minimise it. But anyway, you've let me get a lot of those thoughts out, so I'm a little less angry now.
Okay, John. Well, thanks a lot for that. Thanks for the interview, and appreciate your time.